You know all that business advice we follow? The best-selling books, the latest management trends, even the strategies our own companies use. We kind of assume it's all built on a bedrock of solid science. But what if that foundation has a few cracks?
And that's a really important question, right? Because if the research itself has some flaws, even small ones, then the advice that comes from it might not be as reliable as we think. So today, we're going to peek inside the engine room where all this knowledge gets made.
What we're digging into is this really fascinating source. Think of it as an after-action review for international business studies. You know, like they do in the military or aviation. It's not about pointing fingers or blaming anyone. The goal is just to look back honestly and figure out how to do better next time. It gives us this rare chance to see how the sausage is actually made.
So what did this big quality check actually find? Well, by digging through an entire year's worth of studies from a major journal, researchers spotted a pattern. It turns out there are 4 big challenges that just keep popping up again and again.
Specifically, they analyzed every single empirical article published in the Journal of International Business Studies for all of 2018. And here's the clever part. They looked at the limitations section of each paper. You know, that's where the authors themselves have to admit where their own study might be a little weak. It's a super transparent way to see what the most common issues really are.
So what's the number one problem? Get this. A massive 73% of studies acknowledged an issue with their basic tools. It's a mouthful, but it's called psychometrically deficient measures. That's just a fancy way of saying that the tool they used to measure something, like innovation or company culture, might not have been the right one for the job.
And nipping at its heels at over 62% is something called idiosyncratic samples. This means the group being studied was so unique, maybe firms in just one tiny industry or from a single country, that the results might not apply to anybody else. That puts a huge question mark on how useful that research is for the rest of us.
Okay, so when you see it all laid out like this, you get the whole picture. We've got those dodgy measures at the top. Then, tied for second, are those super specific samples and what's called a less than ideal research design. That's stuff like missing key data or only looking at a very short period of time. And finally, a small but really crucial 8% of studies basically said, hey, we can show these two things are connected, but we can't prove one caused the other. These are the 4 main cracks we need to talk about.
But here's the good part. This isn't just about listing problems. Remember, it's an after-action review, and the whole point is to get better. So for each of these 4 big challenges, the analysis points towards some really smart solutions.
Let's start with that number one issue, those deficient measures. Think of it this way. It's like trying to measure how much something weighs using a ruler. The ruler is a fine tool, but it's completely wrong for that job. In research, this happens when a study tries to measure a huge, complex idea like innovation by only counting the number of patents a company files. It tells you something, sure, but it misses a huge part of the story.
So how do you fix it? Well, the solution is a pretty clear 3-step process. And at its heart, it's about being way more precise about what you're actually measuring. Are different data points all just reflections of the same underlying thing? Or are they different ingredients that combine to create the thing? Getting that first step right forces researchers to see the whole concept, not just one little slice of it.
All right, on to problem number 2, those unique or idiosyncratic samples. This is a big one. You see a study that only looks at, say, family-owned restaurants in Naples, and the first thing you think is, cool, but what does that have to do with my software company in Seattle? It feels like a total dead end. But here's where they flip the script. Instead of seeing a unique context as a weakness, what if you treat it as a strength? Think of it like a laboratory for stress testing a big theory. Does a universal idea about management still hold up in a totally different culture or industry, or does it break? Suddenly, these niche studies become a powerful way to make our theories smarter and more durable. The third challenge, that less than ideal design, is like being handed a jigsaw puzzle, but a third of the pieces are just gone. A researcher might have sales numbers, but no info on who the CEO was at the time, or they might have a single snapshot of data from 1 year, with no way of seeing how things changed over time. You can sort of see a picture, but you can never be totally sure you're right. So how do we find those missing puzzle pieces? Well, one of the most exciting solutions is big data. Traditional research often relies on these neat, tidy, structured databases. But now with new techniques like text mining, researchers can pull valuable insights out of messy, unstructured sources. Things like news articles, earnings calls, or company reports. This lets them basically create new data out of thin air to fill in the gaps. And that brings us to the last and maybe the toughest challenge of all, proving causality. You've heard it a million times. Correlation isn't causation. Just because companies with free yoga classes have higher profits, it doesn't mean yoga caused the profits. Maybe it's just that really profitable companies have extra cash to spend on perks like yoga. How do you untangle that knot?
The source points to two really powerful tools. First, there are quasi-experiments. That's where researchers take advantage of a naturally occurring event, like a sudden policy change that affects some businesses but not others. It's not a perfect lab experiment, but it gets you a lot closer to real cause and effect. And the second one is really cool. It's called necessary condition analysis. It flips the question. Instead of asking what causes success, it asks what is absolutely essential for success to even be possible. It helps you find the true deal breakers.
So, we've looked at the 4 big challenges and some really smart ways to fix them. But let's zoom out. Why does any of this academic stuff really matter to those of us in the real world?
It all comes back to the spirit of that after-action review. This isn't about calling out bad studies or shaming researchers. Look, every single study has limitations. The point is to make the whole system, the whole way we create knowledge, stronger, more transparent, and at the end of the day, more trustworthy for all of us.
I love how the source itself puts it. It's a continuous learning process. By talking about these cracks in the foundation openly, the entire research community can learn how to build better, stronger studies in the future. And that means the insights that eventually get to us will be that much more reliable. And this, right here, is the real takeaway for you. Once you understand these common challenges, the way you consume information completely changes. You stop being just a passive reader of business advice, and you become an active, critical thinker. You start asking much better questions. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you see a headline about some new study that claims to have found the secret to business success, just pause for a second and ask yourself, wait, how did they measure that? Was their sample super specific, and how do they really know that A caused B? Asking those simple questions is the first step to building your own strategies on truly solid ground.